Evidence of Love by John Bloom and Jim Atkinson. This is a really interesting, obviously well-worn book in my collection that is about a kind of infamous murder case from here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, involving an axe murder of a woman by another woman. They were friends from church. So this is a fascinating murder story and murder trial case. And I grew up hearing about this. I remember the summer that this happened. I remember hearing the grown-ups around us, and my mom talking about this case. And I remember just hearing little bits of this in my childhood, and I'd totally forgotten about it until a childhood friend of mine, who is now a librarian, mentioned this book and said this is good reading for people who wanted to know the history of the area. And so I got this book, read it, and it was quite the interesting tale. So just a quick synopsis, and there's some interesting little nuggets in here for those of you that are putting together pieces of the parapolitical puzzle here. Might be a piece of the puzzle, who knows? But quick synopsis of the story. What happened was a woman by the name of Betty Gore was church friends with a lady by the name of Candace, or Candy. I think she went by Candy Montgomery. And they were fairly decent friends. But the woman Candy started having an affair with Betty's husband. And they wound up having a fairly long affair, but both of them had decided this was just going to be a fling, and they didn't really want to leave their spouses. But at one point, Betty's husband, towards the end, he decided he wanted to break it off, wanted to end it, wanted to get into marriage counseling and all that. And so then around that time, and both couples had children, and the kids would play together, and I think two of the daughters were friends, and they would spend the night at each other's house. So one of the daughters was going to come over to Candy's house. This is kind of a complicated thing, but it all is important to the story. Betty Gore's daughter was going to stay over with Candy's daughter this night after some church function they had, and it was some kind of Bible school camp kind of thing they were having, or some kind of day camp for the church they were doing. And Candy left this deal, said she was going to go pick up a swimsuit for the girl that was staying over at her house, went over to Betty Gore's house and proceeded to murder her with an axe that from Betty's garage. And then took a shower, cleaned up, and fled the scene and played like nothing happened, and even had Betty's daughter back at her house with her the whole that night. And the really disturbing thing is, the whole time the murder happened, everything else, Betty's other, I wouldn't say infant, maybe toddler age child, was in her playpen and wound up being left there, I think overnight, screaming in her room. And I think the neighbors I think that's what originally got the attention of some of the people, was hearing the kids screaming, that was left alone with the murdered mom. And finally people came, and her husband had been out of town on a business trip. And anyway, long and short of it, they find mom murdered. And we're not just talking murdered, like she chopped her up like bad with an axe. And for a while there was a mystery of who's on the loose. And this was in I think this is in a weird area, I think around Wiley, kind of way northeast of where I'm at. Anyway, so for a while they were looking around for who was the murderer, and then they finally started tracking it down to the woman Candy, and they wanted to bring her in for questioning. And then that's when she confessed that she was the murderer. And the interesting thing about this, and the whole book is really about the trial, because she goes on trial for the murder of Betty Gore, and it seems like a very open shut case that she's murdered this other woman with an axe in her own house. She had been having an affair with her husband. And this is not really a spoiler alert because everybody around here knew this, but she winds up getting off. She winds up being acquitted on grounds of self-defense. And that's where I'll leave it as far as the story. If you want to really dive into that, you're welcome to. But it is a bizarre case that she tries to make. And she successfully, her lawyer successfully makes it. And it's an infuriating book to read because at no point in this reading this do you ever feel like this woman is innocent. A very selfish, sick woman got away with murder. I can say that with confidence. It's really tragic for Betty Gore and her two surviving daughters that this happened. And but here's why I have this in my collection, and this is more than just kind of a footnote in my collection, because something jumped out at me as I was reading this on page, again, I dog ear my books because they're mine and I can do that and I don't have to worry about a librarian telling me not to. So on page 25, as we're being introduced to Candy Montgomery, and we're getting the whole kind of her little brief history before they launch into the whole story, we're told that Candy worked for the NSA prior to moving to Dallas. Now, that may seem like a minor, it may seem like a very minor thing, like why would that even matter? Well, when this book was published in 1982 or so, when this came out, a lot of people didn't know who the NSA or what the NSA was, didn't have any idea, some of the things it was involved in. So hearing that somebody had worked like a secretary job or something like that at the NSA might not seem much to some people. But in light of today, of a lot of the things that Edward Snowden has come out about, you have to wonder, was her connection to the NSA, did that play any role in her acquittal? And to the good people at the NSA that are probably picking up on these keywords as they're being annotated there by YouTube, I ask you, NSA people, if you have any thoughts on that, if there's any connection. That'd be interesting if any of my minders and intelligence agencies are going to pop up to say anything there. Because, yeah, there's some, could be, and the reason I think that's an interesting point there is when she later, in her own words, towards the end of the book, she gives her account of the murder, and the writers kind of give her her chance to tell her story of the murder and how it all happened. And the way it's described is very much of dissociative, or of her slipping into, if we're to believe her, it sounds like she doesn't use these words, but essentially she slips into some kind of dissociative state and kills Betty Gore, not fully in executive control of her actions. So very interesting with when you have someone that is using this very strange self-defense argument that seems to be slipping into a dissociative state to commit a murder, and they just happen to have worked for the NSA. So, make of that what you will. And one more little point on this that, again, I find really interesting is, as she's telling in the back of the book, and unfortunately I can't tell you the page number offhand, I didn't mark it because when I finished this book, I immediately handed this off to my lovely wife to have her read it and see if she could spot what I noticed. And that is, as Candy is recounting the murder, she mentions that, she says that one of the reasons that that this was self-defense, she had to kill this other woman with an axe, was that this woman, Betty Gore, had locked her into this utility room they were both in, and she locked it it was one of those push-button locks. Well, anybody that lives in a house built in the late 70s through the early 80s or so is familiar with those little push-button locks. And the way you unlock it is simply by twisting the handle. So you can't lock someone in a room with you by pushing that door. It's like a bathroom door. You can't push that little button in and lock yourselves in. That doesn't work. All you have to do is walk over and twist the door. So right there, begs the question of like, did she really think her audience was that naive and that stupid? Because I guarantee you 90% of the people that were reading her account lived in a house with one of those push button locks and would instantly read that and know that that's baloney. So anyway, fascinating but infuriating read, Evidence of Love by John Bloom and Jim Atkinson. But again, that little NSA detail I find fascinating. Maybe it's something, maybe it's not, but I consider this an interesting little piece of, possibly a piece of the puzzle.